On the Dallas Opera Network, you're listening to Operaboxscore.
Let's get ready to rumble!
Wherever you are, however you're listening, it's America's talk radio show about opera. This is Operaboxscore. I'm George Cedarquist, joined by Oliver Camacho, Matt Cummings, Weston Williams, and Ashley Hardgrave. All right, this week, as you can imagine, there's really only one thing on our collective minds right now, and to give you some relief from the horrific news coming out of Ukraine, we'll take the majority of this episode to talk about politics and opera, because those two things go together like peanuts and Crackerjacks. But first, we have to address the soprano in the room. That's right, the war apologist slash cookbook author slash wannabe dictator lover slash soprano. And that big old foot she's stuck in her mouth yet again, plus 2-minute drill. Actually, you know what? Let's give the drill a week off so we can join the protests. Hey, if you're watching on TDO, make sure you subscribe to this podcast. Get that full show. Stitcher, Spotify, click follow, Apple Podcasts. You just hit the plus sign. You too can send us that voice memo. Email us, that hot take, operaboxscore@gmail.com. Get that merch, OBS beer coaster, OBS lapel pin, just for sharing your hot take. Oliver Camacho, there you are.
Here I am. Yes, it's tough times, and I don't know what to say right now. So I just why don't you go on to the next person?
That would be Matt Cummings. He is on the show, but he's not in the opening lineup. So that makes Weston Williams next.
Oh, cool. I get to lighten the mood. Hi, I'm here in my bunker. I'm fine so far. And hopefully we all will be soon. But I do want to say that for this particular show, obviously we are not qualified to talk about much about the political situation going on right now. And the situation is changing so rapidly that all of our information is going to be out of date by the time this episode goes out anyway. So hello from a few days ago. If you're seeing this and everything's fine now, that's great. If not,
it's over.
Good, but, yay!
Putin gave up.
but we are qualified. Oh yeah, go ahead, Ashley.
Hardgrave.
Well, I didn't realize that cracking jokes about Russian kidnapping just 6 weeks ago was going to land us here, but apparently, sorry guys,
you did
well. Didn't realize that was going to happen.
Well, kid, I'll lighten the mood. So I started playing in a pickup ice hockey league this morning. I'm a pretty good skater. I play a little bit of hockey, and so I'm in a pickup hockey league now, first time out, with a whole bunch of guys who are way bigger and way faster than me. And can I just say that, like,
but you've got that hair. They think you're taller.
I do have the David Lynch hair, but right now, like, my thighs and calves are absolutely on fire.
Oh, we're talking about your thighs.
Thighs and calves, all.
I am just like burning.
If this was the 18th century, boy, I'd be fainting right now.
He's
literally
swole. George is swole right now from the waist down.
I am burning from the waist down right now. Let's talk some.
I'm sorry, I was afraid to let it land on I'm burning from the waist down right now. I will say, though, since we are just on the other side of the Winter Olympics, it's really amazing to me how many cold weather sports are so reliant on legs and leg power. You think about speed skating, you think about hockey. Also, curling. The one time that I was given a curling lesson and I learned to throw the stone, I couldn't walk for like 2 days afterwards because my legs were so sore.
Let's all walk over to Operaland and talk some opera.
So as always, we are recording on Monday. It's about 7:30 p.m. in Chicago. It's February 28th. A lot of stuff has gone down, and a lot of stuff will continue to go down, and we don't know what the situation will be when you hear this episode. But we can talk about some of the definite things that have happened in our community, namely opera companies like Teatro dell'Opera di Roma and the Bayerische Staatsoper and Finnish National Opera, all expressing their solidarity with Ukraine, with Putin friend conductor Valery Gergiev losing all of his jobs and even his even his agent saying, you know what, find another manager.
Literally, like all of his jobs.
The Met has also gotten rid of every obviously pro-Putin artist on their roster for the foreseeable future.
Yeah,
which
and their
is,
Lohengrin had the Bolshoi in it, so they're going to have
Yeah.
to scrap that production, the one that was supposed to be planned for next season. And of course,
And they're going to have to build their sets themselves now.
yeah, of course, there's the Anna Netrebko issue, and she and her husband, I forget his last name, were going to give a recital, and there were protests, so they canceled the recital, and they made like a nothing burger statement. And then Anna Netrebko felt even more pressure to like say something personal about how she feels about all this, and
She didn't feel pressure. She just wanted to hear herself talk.
and she basically said, I don't like war, but I'm not a politician, and a musician shouldn't be forced to like be political, So she didn't really step away from her position. She just said she doesn't like war, So we got a really fantastic response to that by the brilliant social media maven and amazing pianist Igor Levitt. He said, being a musician does not free you from being a citizen, from taking responsibility, from being a grown-up, remaining vague when one man, especially the man who is the leader of your home country, starts a war against another country, and by doing so also causes greatest suffering to your home country and your people, is unacceptable. P.S. Never bring up music and your being a musician as an excuse. Do not insult art. Thank you, Igor Levitt.
Look,
Yeah, I mean, the challenge for me on this is, before we get too in the weeds, I think it's terribly important to put a line of demarcation between Russians and pro-Putinists, because I think those are two different populations of people.
Oh, absolutely.
There's a lot of talk around about, don't have Russian this and expel Russian students. No, that doesn't help anyone. But folks that have been vocally in support over the last, decade of someone who is now currently an active war criminal, I think that's a whole other thing altogether. And it's no secret how I feel about Anna Netrebko, and it would be incredibly easy for me to do like a stereotypically angry Ashley rant right about here. But I'm real tired.
Yes.
And can't. And the 1.5 spoons I have left, I won't spend on yelling about her. But I will say that there is a difference between saying that you don't want war, which basically everybody except one person on the planet can say with confidence, and being absolutely vocally in support of the one person on this planet who actually does, in fact, want war. And there are receipts. 2011 Newsweek article when you addressed the idea of being his lover, and you said that you would have loved to have been because he has such a strong male energy. Or in 2012 when you were on the list of 499 trusted people of Vladimir who were officially authorized to campaign for him in his presidential election. And most certainly not in 2014, right after the invasion of Crimea, when you gave a check of 1 million rubles to an opera house in Donetsk in the care of a pro-Kremlin separatist leader, which, by the way, you were photographed with him holding a separatist flag. So there's a difference in being that political for a decade and then posting a now disappeared Instagram story that says you don't think that it's fair that musicians are forced to be called political. It didn't bother you a decade ago. It didn't bother you 10 minutes ago. I'm not really sure why it bothers you now.
I mean, look, here's the thing, right? All theater is political. Right? That's like the first thing you learn in theater school. So I don't know why Anna Netrebko thinks that she's not in the politics biz, right? All theater is political, whether you like it or not.
Especially in Russia,
Absolutely. It's like the birthplace of political theater. Furthermore, like, this is your chance. This is actually your chance, right?
And I also want to like point out, like, there are like, I will say, I do understand it is difficult in Russia to be outwardly, outspokenly anti-Putin. But I want to highlight that there is a lot of very brave people going around right now. There's actually a petition against the war signed by several institutions and general directors, including the Bolshoi general director of Vladimir Urin and the conductor and violinist Vladimir Spivakov. They are circulating a petition among Russian cultural institutions saying that, quote, "We now speak not only as cultural figures, but as ordinary people, citizens of our country. Among us are the children and grandchildren of those who fought in the Great Patriotic War." That's what they call World War II. witnesses and participants of that war, we call for the preservation of the highest value, human life, going against Putin in the war, which is extraordinarily brave. And I wouldn't ask that of every single person in Russia to be that outspoken and obvious. But I do want to point out that and applaud the heroism of people calling that out in this way.
All right, lots more to say, of course, in the conversation as it continues in the days ahead. A little bit of sports talk before we get into the next segment. You know this is for real when FIFA, the International Soccer Federation, which has got to be one of the most corrupt organizations on the planet, has also banned Russia from playing in the European leagues every year and in the World Cup this December in Qatar and in the European Championships in 2024. One fell swoop, FIFA, of all people, has now banned Russia from all of those competitions in soccer. Politics and
they'd be our moral compass.
That's coming up now.
Chalk Talk on Opera Box Score.
It has been a slow week, slow month in the opera news world and in no other field of news. I will say this was an idea we had for a while. It was actually an idea we had for President's Day, but for various reasons it didn't end up happening. We wanted to examine the role of political leaders in opera, and we are not qualified to comment on certain political situations happening abroad at the moment. But
nor do you really want to know what our takes are.
Too spicy. But I do think that this is a great opportunity to explore the relationship between opera and political power. And it's always had this interesting relationship from the very, very beginning, all the way back to the 1600s. Where you have the first operas being produced by wealthy patrons. You think of Monteverdi's L'Orfeo, being paid for by a nobility,
duke.
A duke,
Yeah.
and because pound for pound, opera has more or less remained the most expensive live art form out there.
Besides Disney on Ice.
Disney on Ice.
But that's got a corporation footing the bill.
Pound for pound, opera is so expensive that there's always been this tension between the people who can afford the opera and those who want to criticize it or influence it in some way.
Which makes the opera we're going to first talk about even more interesting, because it represents a shift from operas being performed in the court to being performed in the theater, and what audiences are willing to pay for. But go on, I digress from you.
I think it's an absolutely valid point, because think of operas during the court of Louis XIV, for example, where
they're all kissing his butt
the entire time, to the point where Louis XIV only allows Lully to compose operas. And you even think of like the classical era. You think of like all of these operas written by like Mozart and Salieri, where they'll have a little part at the end that sings the moral, and it's always about how powerful people should treat people nicely. Hint, hint, hint. Please, please pay me.
It's a passive-aggressive take to politics.
But at the same time,
our leaders were enlightened.
If only. And then and you also have just like a lot of trying to make sure that kings and rulers and nobility are put in a good light when they're written for those people. I want to first talk about an opera, one of the early operas in the Renaissance, late Renaissance.
We can call it early Baroque.
Early Baroque, late Renaissance.
Yeah. No, it's not. Call it. Monteverdi is the end of the Renaissance, the beginning of the Baroque, but by the time we get to Poppea, we're like at 1643. So
he's an old man.
Yeah, he is an old man. This is the last opera, and we are talking about the L'Incorazione di Poppea. The coronation of Poppea, And this was written for a public audience, as far as we know, in Venice. Venice had, of course, the first opera houses that were available to the public, and also the first time where you start to see operas not being written exclusively for wealthy elites. That's for several reasons. Part of it is because of Venice's unique history and political structure, which is really unlike anything else in Europe at the time, which is why you still have, even through like the days of Beethoven, people trying to pull away from the nobility. But you have early examples of it here. So let's talk a little bit about Popea, because it's a fascinating opera. This is one of the first operas I saw with Oliver Camacho back in the day. Yeah. So I'm sure he'll be correcting me even more about it as I talk about it. It premiered in 1643. And it is, because it's Monteverdi's last opera, it differs considerably from a lot of his previous work. There is, in fact, a lot of debate over whether certain parts of the opera are actually written by Monteverdi. A lot of scholars think it was a collaborative effort where Monteverdi was overseeing a lot of younger composers. They think that because of the way certain time signatures are written, certain styles, certain parts where if you're listening to it, it's like, this doesn't quite sound like the rest of the opera. But it's a whole debate.
But it probably was common practice at this point. It's like,
exactly.
We got to get a show on. We need one more piece here. Here, you compose that, you know?
Exactly. And there's something to the idea of Monteverdi at this point in his career is such like the old master of opera. Like, he's teaching with everything he does. He's breaking the mold, and he's encouraging these upstart kids to break the mold with him. So
he's as much of a brand as he is a content creator.
Much like Disney on Ice, Monteverdi is a brand. Obviously, if you know anything about history, Popea was a real person. She eventually got married to Emperor Nero, who also a real person, who infamously was one of the worst people in history. Even if you discount a lot of the Christian propaganda at the time, he was still pretty darn nasty, murdering people left and right, lots of backstabbing.
Including his own mother.
Yeah, especially.
And his own child. So.
And his teacher, and eventually Popea, I believe, if I'm remembering that correctly.
I mean, there are so many parallels to a recent autocrat that was in power very, very recently in terms of being loyal only to himself and satisfying his whims and having people in his ear that were very easy to influence. He was very easy to influence as long as they kissed his butt, as long as they flattered him. He's like, oh, yeah, that seems like a good idea.
And the instant he changes his mind, you're dead, usually. Yeah. And this opera does a great job of really emphasizing sort of like the childish petulance of Nero as he goes along, just demanding what he wants, backstabbing, having these shifts of mercy, which instantly go back to being like, wish I hadn't spared that guy. You know what I mean? And the other way around, he's completely like unhinged is very much the vibe they're going for. Now, this is kind of, normal for an opera about, the Roman Empire. But I will emphasize that this is setting a lot of precedents for not just operas in the historical context, not just operas about ancient Rome specifically, but in any sort of political opera. You have a lot of intrigue, you have a lot of backstabbing, you have a really large emphasis on the personalities of the leaders involved, and a lot of, sort of historical tweaking to make sure that they come across
historical-ish
as theater. Exactly. Yeah. You're not being very accurate with the portrayals here, but you are getting the general vibe without losing the sense of a character moving from one moment to the other, which is what makes it so engaging and so interesting even today, so many hundreds of years later. Now, the interesting thing, because I think we'll be talking about some more operas that really play on a lot of the political backstabbing and precedents that I'm talking about here, I don't want to dwell on those too much for this opera. What I want to dwell on for this opera is the final duet, which is very, very interesting, the Portimiro. Basically, what happens is Nero and Popea go through backstabbing, killing, exiling, all of these other morally gray figures. No one's a good person in this opera, really. But at the very end, the two worst people in the entire opera, like the worst people you've ever seen, get everything they want. And they stand there and sing this beautiful love duet to each other, this Portimiro, which may not have been written by Monteverdi, again, which honestly makes it even more intriguing to me that there's this moment of just pure, like, we did it. We did it, baby. We got married. We've gotten everything we wanted. Everyone.
I mean,
who
did
opposes us
Britney
is
Spears
dead.
write all of her songs? Make it more relatable.
But it
for our
has
audience.
these beautiful, like, close dissonant harmonies, not in like a jarring way. It's very much, it has this beautiful descending continuo line, very simple, very clear, very unambiguous. It's almost like watching propaganda for someone for a ruler you've never seen before, after the entire opera was basically showing you how, in no uncertain terms, how terrible these people were. And it really works in a dramatically shocking way, even though the music itself is beautiful. And it really sets up this extraordinary dissonance between what the music is telling you and what the story is telling you. And it's also giving you insight into how contemporary audiences might have interpreted it, how they might have rejected it. It's just a fascinating final cap where the two worst people you've ever seen get everything they want. I just want to listen to a little bit of Kang-min Justin Kim and Hana
Blazhikova, yeah.
Blazhikova, thank you. Conducted by John Elliott Gardner, singing the Portimiro in the same production that Oliver and I saw way back when.
So what you were describing without having the theoretical knowledge, which I mean, I actually appreciate the way you heard it and how you tried to describe it for maybe a non-musically literate audience.
Someone who didn't have to go through a course of ear training in theory.
Yeah. What you were describing is the tetrachord or the ground bass or the passacaglia. This is a rhetorical device that was used by Baroque composers, which actually comes from dance music, but that's another story, which is actually signaling destiny. Whenever we get this tetrachord, descending tetrachord, this is a signal to the audience. This is destiny. This is fate. This is the fate chord progression. So the audience is being told by this music, who they understood it at the time in this 17th century, that this was supposed to happen. You know, these two characters were meant to be together. And that sort of icky moment that happens right before the chord resolves, that dissonance where you just feel like, oh, that's good, but it's also bad at the same time, you know? That is a major second dissonance. And most consonants begins at a minor third or at a major third, but the major second, when you hear those two notes,
it's a minor second.
The minor second, thank you.
It's 3 versus 4.
When you hear a minor second against it, that is referred to as
even closer.
Yeah, that's referred to as
it's as grating as possible.
That's referred to in French terms as le petit mort, like the little death. And that is like the pain of love.
And it's a word that they use for something else.
Yeah. That is the feeling of like you had a big meal and you just cannot wait for this thing to leave your body. And that moment as it's exiting your body, that is that.
And another kind of exit as well that will leave to your imaginations. There's a fascinating production of this from kind of recently, like maybe the last 10 years or so. I think it's the one with Danielle Denise. Oliver, you're probably more familiar with it than I am.
Philippe Jarouski?
Yeah, where he is singing this to her and she is singing it to the crown.
Yeah.
Which takes the like everything you said and flips it on its head, and it is really impactful in terms of like our modern understanding of power and how absolute power corrupts absolutely, and just our modern understanding of taking on sacrifices as if the ends justify the means to get ahead.
It really invites a kind of close reading that I feel like you don't get a lot in early opera. You know, I feel like if you listen to a lot of high Baroque, you know, they're stating the moral right there at the end. There's no hiding.
Oh, and in the prologue too, they're like saying,
"This
like, opera is
this
for
opera
you,
is
Louis."
about." It's kind of like you're writing an essay, and you have to you just like repeat yourself to get that word count. But this really isn't like that. It really expresses it completely musically. And it really makes the audience consider, why are these powerful people getting away with it? Just because they can? Is that the way of everything?
No, it's because the audience knows the end of the story. Like in this time in history, like everybody read about ancient Rome and what happened to Rome and what happened to the Roman Empire and
who did or didn't fiddle while Rome burned.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's something like really, it invites comparisons to contemporary rulers in the time. And obviously we don't have much of the audience reaction at the time, but there were definitely parallels to certain people in power around Europe at the time who, you know, seeing this inevitability, like there's just something so intriguing about it that I always find myself going back to.
Well, fast forward about 150 years to the end of Mozart's career. We are in the Enlightenment and our rulers are supposed to be kind. And we have
enlightened even.
We have the kindest ruler of all time represented in opera. He comes onto the stage. We're talking about the clemency of Titus. It's right there in the title. He comes onto the stage. His entrance,
the nice guy Titus,
is basically the chorus saying, "We love you. You're the best," and him saying, you know, instead of building me, you know, a temple with all the gold, actually, why don't you give that gold to those poor people who got burned in the Mount Vesuvius? You know, so right. One of the first thing he proclaims is like, don't give me these accolades. You know, turn your generosity towards the poor and needy. You know, so I think Nero would have done something. I was like, yeah, or you know, maybe a president who likes gold toilets would be like, yeah, go ahead, turn it into a toilet. You know, but we have Emperor Titus, but let's just say that he, you know, represents sort of a benevolent democracy. There's also a little bit of creepiness there because basically in that same scene, at the end of that scene, he tells his best friend that he wants to marry her sister so that he could be closer to him, you know. And I've always hypothesized that this is Mozart's gay opera. And that, you know, Titus has such a hard time picking an empress because he really doesn't want to settle down with a woman. He wants to settle down with Sesto, who probably recently completed puberty and is no longer doing gay stuff. And his hormones are raging. And the conspirator, Vitellia is in his ear. But before we talk about Vitellia, let's just hear a little bit of Titus proclaiming that, you know, I'm only happy when my people are happy. This is the aria del più sublime, his entrance aria.
Del più sublime soglia, l'unico frutto è ancor per te sì, le sole ore felici, con il giovanni oppressi, le sole magnanici, nel dispensare tesori, al mercato e alla mirto, al mercato e alla virtù.
That from a performance of one of my favorite tenors who sang this role, Frank Lepardo from the Metropolitan Opera. So, young Sesto, best friend of Titus, probably his gay lover when he was a boy, now really interested in this older woman, Vitellia, who ultimately wants to seduce Sesto into convincing Titus to name her the Empress. And he's like, okay, sure, whatever you want, I'll do it, you know? And when he picks his sister instead, she's like, burn it all down. He's like, she urges him to go to the capital because she didn't get what she wanted.
And she's the daughter of a prior emperor, I think, also, and is part
so
of
she thinks they're birthright too.
Mm-hmm.
Like like pick me because I have legacy. I'm old money, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So when Titus chooses Servilia, Vitellia is pissed and tells Sesto to go to the capital. We're very nice people. We're gonna just march to the capital. What did he say? It's a peaceful protest, you know, like.
Yeah, right. Sure, Jane.
And the capital burns, and Titus is assumed to be dead. But he shows up in the second act of the opera. Big cliffhanger there during the intermission. And everybody is trying to, get Sesto to confess what he did, why he did it. And he won't because he doesn't want to give up Vitellia. And so Titus has to make a decision about whether or not he executes the person he loves the most. So this is where, the people want to see justice. The people, who knows how many people were injured or hurt in this burning of the Capitol. And Tito almost lost his life as well. So everybody wants people to become bloodthirsty, and like he's got to be the leader who makes the decision about what to do with his old sweet butt boy. And there's this recitativo accompagnato, which we're listening to right now, which is whenever we have an accompagnato, that is Mozart saying like, oh, this is the thinking. This is like, what do I do to be or not to be moment. In all Mozart operas is the accompagnato.
Ma senza udirlo, ma lo stesso morir. Sì, già l'intesa è abbastanza il Senato. E se gli avesse qualche arcano a svelarmi, olà, ascolti e poi vada al supplicio. Si vada a Sesto e pur di chi regna infelice il destino, a noi si nega ciò che a più m'ha siegato. In mezzo al bosco quel nel mendico a cui circonda ruvida nel rozzo fianco, a cui è malfido riparo dall'ingiuria del cielo augurio informe. Placido i sonni dorme, molto non brava, sa chi l'odia e chi l'ama. Unito il solo torna da sicuro alla foresta, al monte, e vede il cuore acciasse dura in fronte.
And then we have the most gorgeous aria in the opera sung by Sesto, which is basically the only really real love aria of the whole opera, where there's true love there. And the music that you hear in Sesto's aria De Per Questo can be from, any noble character who is talking about real love. And it's a real heartbreaker. And that leaves Tito even more confused. But of course, what's going to happen is right there in the title, the mercy of Titus.
Spoiler alert. Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. But we do get this, tormented aria, a bravura aria, Se al Impero, where he's basically, you know what, folks? It's really hard to be a gay emperor who wants to sleep with his former teenage lover, who wants
relatable
to
stuff.
Yeah, who wants to have sex with the woman I just named as my wife. Weird love quadrangles
like
there.
An inverted triangle.
But all is forgiven and nobody dies. Well, at least not in the second half of the opera. Yes.
Until Titus is executed by the Praetorian Guard a couple years later.
Oh, what happened?
Who can say?
Spoilers for real life.
He was
2,000 years ago.
Roman politics.
We wanted stronger leaders with less man-boy love.
You can blame it on that if you want. I bet it was something else. But so we've got Nero, full on anti-hero. We've got Titus, who is like so good that it hurts.
Yeah.
But as opera and
Le
politics
Petit more, it hurts. So.
continued to
with
evolve.
Sesto.
There's a lot more ambiguity in some of the later political operas, and one of them that had politics not just on the stage but off it as well is Verdi's Un ballo in maschera, splendidissimo.
Yes.
So this is the opera that Verdi turned to as a subject after he had to give up trying to write King Lear, which was like his longtime white whale. Interestingly enough, King Lear is also an opera that has like a lot of politics involved and a lot of family. So this scratches some of those similar itches, I think. And they're
very Verdi.
And there's some fertile ground for it to grow from. And in classical Verdi is has always been a very political composer. There's the Vittorio Emanuele, Re d'Italia, that happens to be a Verdi acrostic that helps everyone remember that he's really linked to this Italian unification campaign, and sometimes his early works are called the Risorgimento operas because there's almost always this like patriotic call to arms chorus with the soldiers rising up to go fight for the fatherland. And so Ballo is premiering around the same time that the Italian peninsula becomes politically unified. and Vittorio Emanuele becomes the king. And in classic Verdi style, he combines these political engagement of his Italian patriotism with his love of like interpersonal conflict and turmoil. And the political and personal become really intertwined, and the motivations for what is done for a personal reason and what is done for a political reason like really intersect and sometimes even counteract each other, and it becomes so like twisted that you can't even tell who is doing what for what. Pure, like there are no pure reasons. Everything is in black and white. There's nothing as straightforward as just like a call to arms, let's rise up and overthrow those Austrians. And these kind of cross pressures like usher in a moral ambiguity that I think is really typical of operas in like the mid 19th century and would continue into the 20th century. This Un ballo in maschera is an opera with a pretty long history. It's based on a real execution of King Gustav III at a masquerade at the Swedish Opera House. Gustav III was a bit of an enlightened despot. He seized power in Sweden through a coup to try to weaken the power of the aristocracy, but was relatively liberal by that kind of token. You know, we're talking about like the Catherine the Great type of liberal, not like an actual.
that moderate Catherine the Great.
Yeah. There are a couple historical characters that did survive into the actual plot, like Ulrika, the fortune teller, she was a real fortune teller and medium that King Gustav III did go to. I found this in my research. It's insane.
That's wild.
So this is in Act 1, Scene 2. He goes to this fortune teller, and there's a cooked up love plot that's totally an invention of the opera librettist. But in real life, he did go to this medium 6 years before he was killed, and she told him to beware of a man with a mask and a sword. And they all wrote it off, but he went back to the palace, and it turns out that like not long after that, he may have encountered one of the men who would go on to be the co-conspirators, and he did have a sword. So this is like, you know, if it seems too good to be true and convenient on the internet nowadays, you're supposed to figure that it's probably misinformation. Maybe this isn't misinformation. I don't care. The story's too good. He was eventually assassinated with a mask too. So like, what you gonna do there? Clearly she can read the future.
Yeah.
So,
unquestionably.
You've heard me talk about assassinating kings a couple times, and if you're familiar with European politics in the late 19th century, you know that is not something that they really liked to let people talk about very much. It wasn't an idea that was particularly politically allowed. So this opera is probably best known besides for its awesome music, for the long and tumultuous relationship that Verdi had with the censors trying to get it onto the stage. Which is that was another like long pattern throughout Verdi's career. Rigoletto famously had a lot of, you know, back and forth with the censors over what was allowed to do. And some of the changes that they demanded in this opera were really similar. You know, he couldn't be a king. He had to be downgraded to a duke at first. And then it couldn't be in modern day Christian Europe. It had to be in medieval Europe, back when they believed in things like fortune tellers. Like, that's fine. He can't be and then he couldn't be a sovereign. He just had to be someone powerful. And he couldn't be having an affair with the wife, because that's not something that's immoral. And kings can't be immoral because there are moral leaders. So it had to be a sister instead. And there couldn't be a ballet, and they couldn't show the murder on stage, and it had to take place backstage, and they couldn't show the scene where the conspirators were drawing lots to see who was going to kill him, and Verdi eventually just like threw up his hands and said, I'm not doing this. And so this opera that was supposed to take place premiere in Naples got delayed a couple of years and ended up premiering in Rome a few years later. With most of those changes, he was able to get the censors to back off on, but one that they just absolutely insisted on was that it could not be a European king. And so they solved the problem with the most absurd shortcut I have ever heard of, which was setting it in puritanical colonial Boston. A city known for its love of fortune telling and masquerades and murder. That's up there for me with like Manon Lescaut, who goes to the desert of New Orleans.
It's like when they recast a sitcom like in the 90s with a whole new actor like between season 2 and season 3.
Like in Fred Don't Address.
Oh my god.
So, and that was the standard way that this opera was presented, like up and as late as the 1980s. There's a production of this from the Met with Luciano Pavarotti that's still set in Boston with the names that are where he's like the Riccardo Count of Warwick instead of Gustavo King of Sweden. Another change that did happen to the libretto that ended up having some historical significance, interestingly enough, is that when Ulrika the Fortune Teller was no longer this real life medium, they had her specified as being a black woman. That is not the word they used. And this was the opera where the role in the opera where Marian Anderson made her Met debut, the first black singer to sing a role at the Met back in the 50s. But it is just like the funniest misunderstanding of American history that has ever happened. Like even in the 1800s, Boston was still like a relatively morally conservative place that would like raise objections about what was offensive. So they just like never read any newspapers about America ever, clearly.
Yeah.
But just like I love how in this opera like the winds of turmoil are blowing like both on this family drama that seems so small scale that ends up that like the man whose wife the king is in love with is the one who is his best friend who ends up having to be the one to kill him in a bizarre twist of fate, and just the way that they get so tangled up with each other, and that really comes to a head at this great ensemble at the end of the second act where Oscar the page comes to invite everyone to the masquerade like right after they made their plan to assassinate him. So everyone is singing at cross purposes. It's chaos, but it's beautiful chaos.
È un ballo in maschera splendidissimo. Benissimo. E la meco interverrà. E voi conserva quell'abito dello spedito e provo.
I cannot get that out of my head. Like once I hear that, that's it. I'm done for the day. For probably the next couple of days, that's the only thing I'm going to be singing. So.
And that was Piero Capuccilli, Riri Grist, and Katia Ricciarelli, as well as the ensemble of the Royal Opera House in London with Claudio Abbado conducting.
Oh, Un ballo in Mosca. I love this opera so much, and I don't know why it's not done more. Why it's not more popular. I know that the role of Amelia is really hard to cast, but man,
I think it's one of Verdi's like across the board strongest works.
Yeah.
Like everything dramatically actually makes sense. Which like in Trovatore, I'm fine writing off the fact that this plot absolutely would never ever happen. But this one, like you don't even have to make excuses for it. Like the drama is real.
The fortune teller is real in this one.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I didn't know. That's wild.
And for there to be a second soprano part that is juicy and fun to sing, and the baritone aria is one of the all-time best baritone arias, and then all the music for Riccardo is just so delicious. Ma se forse perde is like one of the best cavatinas ever written.
And on top of that, it's also like an opera that maybe has the best cast of any opera recording of all time, which is the Leinsdorf one. We're slipping this in at the end of Black History Month. But we've got Leontine Price in her prime, Shirley Verrett in her prime, Riri Grist in her prime, Carlo Bergonzi in his prime, Robert Merrill in his prime. It is just like top to tail incredible.
Amazing. I think we want to jump in with one more, which I'm going to take over here. So we've heard a lot of, from the early days of opera, sort of the relationship between rulers and the politics surrounding presenting those people on the stage. I want to jump quite ahead to Nixon in China, which is not going to be a
news.
Well, that's the thing. That's what I want to point out, because in the 20th century, you have the start of a different interpretation of the nature of power in Europe and in America and across the world, really. Theater has a specific limitation when you're talking about opera-based, when you're talking about leaders and political events, because in an opera especially, or in a play, you have these individuals giving performances. You have someone going up there and becoming sort of the avatar for everything going on politically in some form or fashion, whether or not it's censored or not. And in the 20th century, you start to see more like mass movements, especially with the communists, fascists of the early 20th century. This larger understanding of politics as a broader sort of economic force through like Marxist interpretations of history. And that poses a big problem if you're trying to create a play. This is why you have like, Bertolt Brecht doing all his weird stuff, trying to
make him feel
depersonalize it. Exactly. But that's not very dramatic. And on purpose, it's not very dramatic. But I want to talk about sort of the return of the drama with sort of through the postmodern lens of John Adams writing an opera about Nixon going to China only a few years after it actually happened. As a matter of fact, I believe the 50th anniversary of Nixon's visit to China just happened a couple days ago as we're recording this, which was just a wild coincidence. But basically, this is a very specific historical event that was a big deal, but it's not a war. It's not an assassination. Nobody dies. It's a diplomatic event that went pretty well. And unlike from a distance, you're like, how is that going to be an effective opera? But the answer is by really interrogating in a very postmodern way how the audience is responding to the events on stage in conjunction with how the audience at home would have been viewing this historical event between the United States and China finally coming together after years of isolation on China's part. It really comes down to the quality of the libretto. Alice Goodman does a phenomenal job of really making sure that every leader feels personal and dramatic as a dramatic character, but it's an ensemble cast. It's not about the two giants, Nixon and Mao. It's Nixon, Mao, Zhou Enlai, the wife of Mao Zedong.
Rather iconically,
it's exactly. It's an ensemble cast for something that 100 years earlier would have probably just been about Nixon and Mao. Famously, there's even like little touches like Henry Kissinger, whom John Adams and Alice Goodman do not like, for many understandable reasons. They basically give him an attack of diarrhea and make him leave the stage before all of the big closing ensembles where everyone is finding doing those big final moral arguments and really showing the culminations of their characters, this moment in time. Henry Kissinger is sitting on the toilet. It's great. This is really about perception, because that's what the event was. It was about how it appeared on the news to everyone seeing it and what the significance of it was as propaganda for both sides, as a genuine political coming together. It's got all of the meat of that big political event with these big political leaders really just viewing it as a moment in time, and really giving an opportunity for the audience to say, this is a departure from what really happened. Why are we departing now? Why is this so different from what was happening in reality? It's not little tweaks to make it more dramatic. It's completely leaving reality to make a ballet about a woman getting beaten real, you know? It is very much, it's a kind of opera that in a very postmodern way challenges you to look at this event as a fictional event, but also realizing just how real and just how immediate and how recently it happened. Pretty much everyone in this opera was still alive when it premiered. None of them liked it. Everything is real, but everything is also so unreal at the same time because of this layer of propaganda through the screen that people were viewing the event on. I just want to close a little bit with a little bit of that famous aria, News, sung by James Maddalena. This is from the studio recording conducted by Edo de Wart.
It's prime time in the USA. It's prime time in the USA. It's yesterday night. It's yesterday night. Yesterday night. They watch us now. The three main networks' colors glow, livid through drapes onto the lawn. Dishes are washed and homework done. The dog and grandma fall asleep. A car's past, playing loud pop, is gone. As I look down the road, I know America is good at heart. An old cold warrior piloting towards an unknown shore through shoals.
Good call. Bad call. On Opera Box Score.
All right, let us wrap up this show this week. Wow, this is a exhausting show. Good call, bad call. It's how we finish every show, whatever the weather. Oliver Camacho.
Well, just since we didn't have a 2-minute drill today, I did want to congratulate Megan Moore, Eric Faring, Blake Denson, and Eric Grendall, and Timothy Murray, who were the George London Foundation competition winners, each of them taking home 10,000 large. And I know, congratulations. And I'm actually disappointed in the George London Foundation for not making Cody Bowers, the countertenor, one of this year's winners. Cody Bowers, that's a name you will hear in the future. He is incredible. I told him he was going to win. He didn't, so I have egg on my face right now. But he will win.
That is a rare admission from Oliver.
He will win.
Weston Williams.
Well, going back to the current situation in Eastern Europe, I do want to highlight two singers, Elena Garancha and Piotr Bachala, who have both canceled all of their upcoming concerts in Russia. And they both posted statements against the war. And Elena Garancha is basically called it, a criminal sort of a war. And music has to unite. And what would the world be, she says, without cultural exchanges between each other? And Piotr Bachala, unlike a certain soprano we might have talked about earlier, in a statement on Instagram said, "I am not a politician and I have no influence on political decisions, but I am an artist and I can use my voice to express my opposition to the war that takes place just across the border of my beloved motherland." And I just think it's really great to see artists standing up for what's right, using their political power for their image for political good. What a thought, and I just wanted to, give a shout out to Piotr Bachala and
good tone quality in Russia has been sanctioned. You're not going to get those beautiful tenor and mezzo-soprano notes.
Sorry about it.
Ashley Hardgrave.
Congratulations to friend of the show, Janai Breger, and hopefully soon to be friend of the show, Isaac Savage, for stepping in at the last minute as soloist for the Beethoven Ninth Symphony with Chicago Symphony Orchestra this weekend. It was a really emotional series of concerts. Jennifer Johnson Cano was the mezzo, Tarek Nazmi was the bass, all delightful, and there was really something different about singing about brotherhood and unity on Thursday of last week. Yeah.
There was one particularly beautiful voice in the choir, sort of in that mezzo soprano range, just kind of, some, I don't know, I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was one person in particular. Sounded amazing.
Fully sobbing, that was me.
I watched Joel Coen's film The Tragedy of Macbeth, which is with Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand. It's shot entirely in black and white. It is utterly brilliant. The entire design looks like an Adolf Appia set. And for all you scenic designer nerds out there, you know what I'm talking about. Adolf Appia. The way that this thing is lit. Is that a drinking cue? I don't know. You could drink on that. There you go. It is so gorgeously lit. It's beautifully acted. It's less than 2 hours, and it's some of the most conversational, intelligible Shakespeare I think I've ever heard. That's it for this week's edition of America's Talk radio show about opera. Our announcer, he's Norm Waddell at normwaddell.com. Again, if you're watching on TDO, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Get that full show. Stitcher and Spotify, you click follow. On Apple Podcasts, you just hit the plus sign. Send us a voice memo. Email us your hot takes, operaboxscore@gmail.com. You're going to get an OBS beer coaster and an OBS lapel pin. A couple folks wrote in last week. I need to get them their merch. Our creative consultant is Oliver Camacho. Our audio and video editor is Weston Williams. For your co-hosts, Matt Cummings and Ashley Hardgrave, I'm George Cedarquist, asking you to continue the conversation about opera as you come down from your Fat Tuesday punchki sugar high. We're back with an all-new show next week when we take a deep dive into the Metropolitan Opera's just announced 22-23 season. Plus, you get more opera headlines, more hot takes, and more solidarity with Ukraine. Join us.